You are listening to Perplexity.
Yokai is the catch-all Japanese word for ghosts, shapeshifters, tricksters, and demons. And in Japanese folklore about yokai, there dwells an infamous creature. They're giant, strong, menacing, and often depicted as being malevolent. Most legends describe this entity as being ogre-like or goblin-like in appearance. These creatures are considered to be foreign in origin, perhaps introduced into Japan from China, like Buddhism. These creatures are typically male, but they have occasionally been depicted as female. These creatures come in a variety of colors, but are often described as being red or blue. They also have horns, 3 fingers and toes, and sometimes 3 eyes. This creature is called the Oni. One of the most iconic masks in Japan is the Oni mask. Renowned for its menacing expression, fangs, and horns, these masks not only represent this malevolent creature, but also represent fear, deception, vengeance, and hatred. They have been worn in traditional ceremonies for centuries, and are still worn today, often during the Setsubun festival. These masks are believed to protect against evil spirits while also attracting good luck. Some even believe the Oni mask can protect its wearer in combat, hence why the Japanese samurai wore them. These masks continue to be prominent today in Japanese art and theater. If you watch anime, you've probably seen these masks. And if you watch Demon Slayer, you're likely already familiar with the Oni. It's safe to say the Oni is a sacred part of Japanese folklore. So today, we will be diving into the legends and lore of the Oni. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Perplexity, a mystery podcast. As always, I am your host, Kaydra. If you're new to the show, hello and welcome. I tell tales every single week that have perplexed me. So if you love a good mystery that leaves you wanting more, don't worry, you're in the right place. And if you end up enjoying today's episode, I would love if you continue to follow along. If you're a returning listener, hello, my friends. Welcome back. I'm so happy you're here, and I have a fascinating tale for you guys today. Someone from my live show a while back actually requested that I cover the Oni, but I did not write down their name. So if you are listening to this, I'm so sorry, and please send me a message or a comment and let me know that this was you so that I can shout you out in the episode description or shout you out later on. I'm excited to be covering this topic, but I do want to say I am not Japanese, obviously, so I apologize if I say anything wrong or incorrectly. I did look up all of the pronunciations of everything, but there's not always good pronunciations and videos of things online, and this is something that, I just learned about, so I apologize in advance if this is not completely accurate, but I really did try to use good sources, and I really enjoyed learning about the Oni, so I'm looking forward to sharing it with you guys. Trigger warning, as always, for today's episode. This podcast is not for children. Listener discretion is advised, and all of the sources that were used for this episode are available down in the show notes. So without further ado, let's get into the legends and lore of the famous Japanese Oni. So Oni are depicted to be quite large and scary, standing sometimes taller than trees. They're often described as having wild hair. It's often curly and frizzy. They have tusks and horns. They wear loincloths made of the pelts of their greatest kills. A lot of legends also depict the Oni as wearing underwear that has a tiger print on it. They are incredibly strong, and many of them are accomplished sorcerers. Labeled the villains of mankind, Oni are known to bring disaster, destruction, thunder and lightning, spread disease, and because their dwelling place is hell, one of their pastimes is punishing the eternally damned. Oni make up the armies of the great generals of the underworld as well, and a lot of legends depict them as being slaves to the god of the underworld. Sometimes Oni have been depicted as living in remote mountains, caves, islands, and abandoned fortresses, kind of like the Grinch of Japan. They are believed to be omnivores, but they are partial to humans, livestock, and alcohol. They're born out of the death of a wicked human who winds up in one of the many Buddhist hells. And that wicked human is then transformed into the Oni. Oni are often depicted as being ogre-like, and this in a way is revealing the inner evil part of the human. Though occasionally a human can transform into an Oni while they're still living as a human. So kind of transforming back and forth, or transforming while they're still alive. One of the most famous Oni legends that I kept coming across is the story on Shuten-doji and the mountains of Oyama, which is now Kyoto. This Oni was a heavy drinker, and he was a human during the day, then he would transform into an Oni at night. One of the other legends with this goes that he was basically wearing an Oni mask and drinking and acting a fool, and when he tried to take the mask off, it had fused to his face. Shuten-doji was powerful, he was feared, and he became the leader of a band of thugs known to rampage through medieval Kyoto. They would steal, murder, and cannibalize the daughters of nobles. When an Oni transforms while they're still a living human, it means that their soul is beyond redemption. So this was the case for Shuten-doji. Oni that transform in this way are then forced to become brutal servants of the great Lord Enma, the ruler of hell. But luckily for the people of medieval Kyoto, there lived a warrior named Minamoto no Yorimitsu who was able to slay and decapitate Shuten-doji. When an Oni kills a human, they often use their weapon of choice, an iron club, crushing a human to death for mere enjoyment. After a day's work of killing, when the Oni returns to hell, they are known to torture the damned sinners into the night. They have been said to peel the skin clean off of their victims and break their bones. The souls they torture, though, are not quite wicked enough to be reborn as Oni themselves. Oni are also said to wear many faces. Yet, their amorphous and multifaceted nature has allowed them to take on many metaphorical meanings that mirror the evolution of Japanese society and culture. So it's probably quite clear by now that this is not a creature you would want to stumble across while navigating the streets of Japan. Though some legends depict them as being more kind and funny. But Japanese mythology is full of countless stories of Oni encounters with lords, ladies, warriors, and rogues. So to go back several centuries, originally all spirits, ghosts, and monsters were known as Oni. It was a big umbrella term. The root of their name translates to hidden or concealed, and the word Oni was originally written with the Chinese character for ghost. In the older days of Japan, Oni could be ghosts, gods, yokai, and even murderous humans. There are a lot of legends discussing how Oni were these worshipped gods, these religious beings. But like many other cultures, over time, these legends and cultural practices would change along with languages. For example, female demons are now called kijo. Japanese society has also associated Oni with outsiders and targets of prejudice, including women and wartime enemies. Scholar Koyama Sotoko was the first to trace the image of the Oni and its social background from more of a historical perspective. So according to Sotoko, quote, Oni have influenced Japanese hearts and minds from ancient times until today. How have people come to grips with these beings and passed on their thoughts about them? Tracing the Oni lineage means peering into the psyche of the Japanese people, end quote. So in order to do that, we need to go back about 2,000 years. In China, it was believed after death, people became gui, or ghosts, the same written character that was later used to describe Oni in Japan. They lived in the underworld. Gui were part of Confucianism and Taoism, gaining influence from Buddhism. The boundary between Gui, ghosts, and Shin, gods, was very thin, leading some Gui to become objects of worship. It was believed other Gui might be brought under control through magic. Gui were also thought to spread disease. By the 7th century, the Goi legend had spread all the way to Japan, but it naturally transformed, and in the Heian period, 794 to 1185, Mononoke, or spirits of unknown people, were beginning to be given the name Oni. The big difference in the Japanese legend, though, was that unlike Goi, Oni were only ever malevolent. There was a belief based on cosmology that there were specific nights where the risk was actually greater to be attacked by the Oni, and they would often attack in a group. This resulted in aristocrats tightening security and staying indoors. Nihon Shoki, completed in 720, reported how in 544 people called the Mishihas from the northern area of Japan came ashore on the island of Sado. The islanders were afraid of these newcomers, and they believed them to be Oni. Some people ended up being abducted throughout this encounter. In 733, other reports were compiled in what is now Shimane Prefecture. These horrifying reports claimed one-eyed Oni had devoured a rice farmer. In Shoku Nihonji 797, a jujutsushi or sorcerer was described that could control a godlike Oni, making it fetch water and firewood for him. If the Oni disobeyed, it would become trapped in a binding spell. In 901, a story was recorded describing an incident in 887 where a woman was devoured in the night by an Oni in Heian-kyo, now known as Kyoto. And within just that single month, there were 36 other stories of similar incidents with the Oni. In 929, the 12th century Buddhist cultural history Fuso Ryakuki reported an Oni footprint in the imperial court. The footprint was incredibly large, with 2 to 3 hooves. So as you can see, these stories go very far back. With the Oni tracing back originally to China, we also know there is an ancient Chinese ceremony for driving them out, so as not to spread their disease. There came a similar ritual to drive them out in Japan, which is connected to the Setsubun festival. The Setsubun festival is incredibly famous. It's still celebrated today, but it stems back to the practice of dispelling vengeful ghosts ahead of the Lunar New Year. In an ancient Setsubun festival in the 9th century, it's written a practitioner of Onmyodo ordered all Oni to leave Japanese boundaries. The Oni were sentenced to the island of Sado in the west, Shikoku in the south, Tohoku in the north, and the Goto Islands of Nagasaki Prefecture. From the medieval to the early modern period, there were even Japanese maps with an area called Rasetsukoku, deriving from the word Raksasa, and this is a Sanskrit word for Oni. This was an island of Oni, often called Onigashima. According to legend, a warrior named Minamoto no Tamatomo voyaged into an unknown island where he encountered many Oni descendants. They stood at more than 3 meters high and carried swords. There are also some records describing humans giving birth to quote-unquote Oni. And in case you hadn't guessed it, these were often cases where mothers had birthed children with some type of deformity. They were labeled Onigo, meaning Oni children. These babies were seen as a bad omen, and they were often left abandoned. Parents were disposing of their children with a convenient sense of righteousness, claiming if they didn't abandon their child, it would result in a crisis to their village. In many villages, women with low social statuses were also often linked to the Oni. In legends of female Oni, many are enchantresses born out of feelings of jealousy, vengeance, and shame. They have been labeled Kijol, meaning Oni woman. According to historian Koyama, quote, "From the outset, Buddhism was a misogynistic religion. That aspect did not come over to Japan when it first arrived in the country, but from the second half of the 9th century. Prejudice against women gradually established itself along with the spread of the patriarchal system. Women were outsiders in a society centered on adult men. At the same time, they had an unmatched importance in that everyone was born from women. This was why it was necessary to suppress them. If they were weak, they would not be seen as Oni." End quote. Women were believed to lack the ability to practice Buddhism and were often labeled as jealous and overtly sexual. When coming into the Muromachi period, the Japanese people grew skeptical of the Oni's existence. It was at this point that they became more recognized as being lore, a myth. For a while, Oni became associated with war. During the Russo-Japanese War, there were picture books being created depicting Russian Oni. In World War II, US and British soldiers were represented as Oni. And in April 1945, Westerners were depicted as Oni in Japan's first full-length animation, Momotaro, Umi no Shinpei. The Oni's genesis has been attributed to people's fears of the destructive power of natural phenomenon as well, like storms, while other people say they came from inhabitants of ancient Japan that were labeled evil, dwelling deep in the secluded mountains. Similar to the Bunyip legend and many other traditional stories, the legend of the Oni has taken on more of a cute and gentle iteration today. They're mostly seen in games and stories, like D&D. They're almost humorous, with their oversized facial features and bright red or blue coloring. They've become increasingly popular as well thanks to the hit anime series Demon Slayer. But we must not forget the Oni history. According to historian Koyama, quote, "From ancient times, the Japanese described their targets for prejudice and exclusion as Oni, which were blamed for any kind of national crisis. Using the label of Oni carried a fixed image, which shut down any thought of other people or situations being multifaceted. In the current uncertainty about where the world is going, I think we should study the history of the Oni and always consider whether we hold any prejudiced viewpoints." End quote. So this was part of what I found so interesting about this legend is the links to systemic oppression, the links to the patriarchal system, and how it was really used as a propaganda tool to make the Japanese people fear anyone who was different from them or anybody that challenged Buddhist beliefs. I also did try to hunt on Reddit for any type of Oni encounter stories, but I really couldn't find anything, unfortunately. With that being said, we talked about the yokai at the beginning, the Japanese ghost, and I was able to find some things from there. So since this episode is a little bit shorter, I wanted to add in some encounter stories with the Japanese yokai. So I found this on the paranormal subreddit, and it is from Reddit user Monday__Adams, and it's titled Shared Japanese Dream Demon. Can anyone explain what this means, or tell me how we can protect ourselves? So, backstory, relevant. I met my husband in 2018 while we were deployed to Okinawa, Japan. I heard about a ghost that was caught on our barracks' security cameras, but we weren't supposed to see it. I pulled some strings and was able to get the footage. It was just an apparition. Seemed like he was just walking the halls. Nothing out of the ordinary. I showed everyone. Sorry, side note. How is seeing an apparition on camera like a normal, everyday thing? I'm so sorry, what? Sorry, okay. Back to the story. News travels fast when you're bored. A few days after I got the video, I was in a friend's room watching movies when two guys come out of the room across from us with a pizza box that had a Ouija board drawn on it. I guess I was the resident spooky bitch, so one of the guys asked if I had a real Ouija board. I did, and I gave it to him. And now we're married and have a baby. Anyways, he used the board. I doubt he even said goodbye or put it away correctly, and I didn't care because I liked to test the spirits at that time. Nothing happened that night, but the spirit presence seemed to shift at that point. Everyone in the barracks could feel it. Fast forward to winter 2019. We are married, and I was currently pregnant. My husband was complaining about having trouble sleeping. He had mentioned having a demon-like presence taunting him in his sleep. but he was going through some mental stuff at the time, so I thought it was due to those circumstances, and his dreams were portraying his internal fears and anxieties. I never pushed him to tell me about it. But one night, I had an extremely vivid dream, one that haunts me to this day. In this dream, my husband and I were across a field with a house on the other side. We came upon a well about 20 yards from the house. I had a feeling that I needed to avoid the empty space between the well and the house. So our only option was to climb down the well and get into the house that way. My husband went first, but before I could climb down, a creature appeared. He had a man's body and head, but the way he was crouching was animalistic and twisted. He had stringy black hair, gray skin, black, soulless eyes, and a lipless smile that reached almost ear to ear. He reminded me of the Japanese demons and evil spirits that are often depicted in movies and creepypastas. He started out with a whisper, "Let me in," but it grew to a normal tone and then ended in him screaming, "Let me in, let me in." I woke up to myself screaming, "No," like a blood-curdling scream. My husband sleeps like he's dead, but I'm surprised even that scream didn't wake him up. I forced myself to sleep again, and this time, he was there, but stayed at a distance. I didn't tell my husband about this until a few days later. We were in the car and I wanted to ask him about his dreams. He said that the demon would follow him around and constantly pester him, trying to get my husband to follow him. At one point, he gave him a date about a month away. He said he thought the demon was trying to get control of him, as he kept being asked to be let in. My husband would always say no, but he would not stop asking. I was scared to ask the one question that I needed answered, but I mustered up the courage and blurted out, "What does he look like?" My husband described my exact dream demon, exactly how I had seen him in my own dream. When I say exactly, I mean down to the lipless smile and soulless eyes. Even the way he would crouch. I felt like all the blood had drained from my body. I went cold. I told him about my dream at this point, and we agreed to just continue to say no and ignore him. I've seen him since, and always ignore him. So he eventually stopped visiting. My husband just recently started bringing him back up again, saying he's back. I don't know what any of this means, but I have had some rough mental days recently, and I am scared that this demon/entity/whatever the hell he is will use my weakened mental state to his advantage. I'm no stranger to strange happenings and spiritual encounters, but this one is different. This one chills me to my core. The presence is extremely unwelcomed, and he knows it. That date he gave my husband came and passed. We stayed in that day, and thankfully, nothing happened. The date was September 9th, 2019, 9919. I looked up the significance of 9919 and 999, and it said that 9919 meant you were ready to take things under your control, and 999 meant the end of a cycle in your life. It was time for new beginnings, but I don't see why such an unsettling and evil presence would be hinting at this out of everything. End quote. That's terrifying. It sounds like they encountered something through their spiritual practices that they weren't supposed to, and they got a serious attachment. It's interesting that it's attached to the two of them as well. And it's, in this point in the story, it's an oppression stage nearing possession. It's like it needed permission to be let in, and then it would have gone full-blown possession. But super creepy. That right there is exactly why I will never touch a Ouija board. This next story was also from the paranormal subreddit, and it's from Reddit user no-scheme-3759. Before internet was as big as it is now, me and my brother encountered something. Many, many years later, I found a notice from Swedish folklore to Japanese Konaki Jiji. We used to live close to the Baltic Sea, out in the middle of the forest. I was 18 and my brother 17. We had been to a party in a neighboring house. I mean, we lived out in the middle of nowhere. It had maybe 12 houses, and that's it. Rich people lived there, and old people that had the small houses. Only twice did the bus ever stop on that road during the weekdays, and they would usually pass you as they didn't see you standing there. Either way, I was drafted into the military, and some girls chatted me up at the party. It was at a rich people house. I don't know how the conversation started, but I had said something about how I wasn't afraid to die, and so on. We were walking home on a wooded path, me and my brother. The time was maybe 3 o'clock at night or 3:30. He was upset with me because I had said I didn't care if I died. I had a long history of suicidal thoughts as I was abused a lot in school, bullied and beaten up, left bloody each and every day, which took a great toll on my life and my happiness. He stopped me on a crossroad. Next to the crossroad there stood a mini wooden bridge over a small stream. But it was barely a stream at all. My brother stopped me because it was close to our house, and he wanted to finish our conversation before we got home and could wake up our mom. So he told me he didn't like me talking like that, and being me, I just kept telling him, I don't care about my life, and I don't care if I die or not. I can't say exactly what I said, but that was the concept of it. During our talk, I felt anxious, and I'm not a guy that gets scared. I mean, we had a ghastly, ghostly experience as kids. Knocks on the doors, TVs turning on full volume, and as kids, you run around scared and laugh and nothing else. We just didn't think much of it. I live in an old country, Sweden, with old town, old people, and old folklore. So I'm used to hearing these kinds of stories. They've never bothered me. But this day, I felt something was odd. I felt as if I was being watched, and I remember looking around me when I saw this giant toad with big eyes, and I thought that the toad was watching me, but I let it go. But just a few seconds after, we both heard a small child crying and yelling, "Papa." We both froze. Again we heard, "Papa." It sounded like a young 2-year-old child, in distress, in the middle of the night. The sound was coming from close to the water. The road led straight down to the sea. I was petrified, like I couldn't move. Again, I heard, "Papa." My brother said we needed to help them, and I yelled back, "Do you need help?" His voice echoed at the reply from someone that sounded like a 100-year-old angry man. "Yes," they said. I was scared. He too. We both felt it was odd, and I instantly said, "Why didn't it echo?" My brother looked at me. "Why did it echo when you shouted and not when the kid shouted?" He was equally confused, and I still could not move. I was holding my brother's sweater during the first "Papa," and now he said, "We need to check the water." He ran down. I know for sure that if I hadn't held on to his sweater, I would have stayed on that spot, because I couldn't move like I was under a spell. But the moment I was jacked from the spot, I could freely move just like me. I forgot to say, that moment I felt a fear I have never felt before, and I had been in dire shits many times. The only thing I can say is it felt like I feared for my soul, like the essence of my being was in danger. We ran down to the sea, onto a small boardwalk or wharf, or whatever it's called in English, and we shouted and yelled, and no one and nothing replied. I muttered to my brother, and again pointed out how there was no echo, and it was echoing all the time when we shouted. I couldn't let that go. I have high-functioning autism, I know now, when something is off or wrong, and it gets stuck in my head, and I can't let things go. After maybe 20 minutes of standing there, an old woman came onto the wharf. She had heard us shouting, and she lived in one of the small old houses nearby. She stood there with us waiting, and told us, pointing at an overgrown spot in the water, that a wharf had been there. One that was very small. She saw it when she was a kid, and a small child had drowned in that same spot, too. It had been abandoned ever since. We walked home, and my room is next to my mom's. She woke up and asked us why we had come home so late, and I just couldn't go to bed without telling her about this odd experience. Now, this is where things get even more strange. My mom has a friend that's psychic. I never cared for that stuff, but I had met her many, many times. She called us the next morning because she had a feeling something had happened, and my mom told her that we had heard a small boy crying out in the woods. The psychic woman then asked all of these questions. Were they standing at a crossroad? Was there water next to it, like a stream? Do you know if any child has died there? And then the most insane and weird questions she said that makes the entire story remain stuck in my head. Did it echo when it cried? The echo, the one thing I couldn't let go of, she asked about. And the last thing, the cherry on top, did we talk about wanting to die? The answer was yes to all of these questions. I had lured something that in Swedish folklore is called myling, a drowned child according to the myth that was never baptized, a child that was drowned by their own parent. That child will remain there, waiting for someone like me, saying they want to die. When that happens, they will drown the person so their souls can be found together, so it will not be alone. It's so sad, but so scary. I always imagined a wet, blue kid sitting there on a stone, just waiting for my brother to run away, so it could walk up to me and drown me while I was unable to do anything. She also asked if it all stopped the moment we walked away, and it had. She said all this stuff, if I remember, that the crossroads is a place where spirits have more energy, and the supernatural has a way to get to us, like a thinning of our worlds. Same with door frames and such. She wondered if the stream was where the child had died. She also said that stream led right down to that wharf, and it means it's 20 to 50 meters. Regarding the echo, she told us spirits don't have a voice. They are dead, so they cannot talk. They force their words onto us, and that's why there's no echo, because it's not a real voice or a real sound. It's just for us to hear. So this freaked us both out. When we were there, we both know what happened, and a 4-year-old kid turning into a 100-year-old man with an angry voice is a very frightening thing. Years later, I began Googling myling over and over and couldn't find anything, until Wikipedia got bigger, and I found 2 articles about myling. There was only one other account of myling in Swedish folklore that has been documented, and the drowned kid shouts, "Papa." It doesn't mean dad or father, though. In Old Swedish, it means to be breastfed, as if the kid was screaming to be fed. It also had a link into Japanese folklore, discussing the yokai. They discussed a spirit of an old man that cries like a child, a spirit that will jump onto the back of the person it's attaching itself to, weighing them down more and more as they search for the source of the crying. In the end, they will crush the person. Either way, a kid turning into an old man, a kid shouting, "Papa," I haven't thought about this for a long time. Sorry if that story didn't always make a lot of sense. I had to change quite a bit of the wording because of syntactical and spelling errors. But I wanted to include that because it is a story from Sweden and Swedish folklore, but there's pieces of it that seem to tie to yokai and Japanese folklore, like the spirit of the old man that cries like a child. And there's just not a lot of stories about yokai online, but it seemed like this one could be related. I mean, there are stories of other like cryptids and pieces of folklore that are quite similar to each other and that are spotted all over the world. So who knows, this being all the way in Sweden could still have ties to entities that are described in Japan. Like maybe they're seen all over the world and they just have different names. So that, everybody, is the perplexing lore of the Japanese Oni, along with some other tales of seemingly Japanese yokai. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you did, be sure to let me know. Send me a DM on Instagram or drop a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. And if you have ever had an Oni experience or you've seen a yokai, if you know somebody who has, I would love to hear your story. You can always send your stories and topic requests to perplexitymysterypodcast@gmail.com. If you have not done so yet, please take 2 seconds and leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. And if you would really like to support the show and get tons of perks, be sure to check out patreon.com/perplexitymysterypodcast. There's discounted deals on there. There's a 7-day free trial for all of my tiers. So if you're not sure if it's for you, definitely go check it out. You'll be, I think, pleasantly surprised at all of the things I have on there. There's over 30 episodes of bonus content, and I'm releasing things pretty much every week. And I release a couple of bonus episodes a month. You all are amazing. I hope you have a great week and stay safe. And I will talk to you next week. Bye.